security conference, but Marco Rubio warned that Washington is prepared to act alone if necessary. The United Kingdom and several European allies say they are, quote, convinced Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny was killed by a toxin from a poisonous frog. Navalny died nearly 2 years ago in a Russian penal colony. The Russian government has denied responsibility. And thousands of women and children, many with links to ISIL fighters, are expected to be transferred out of a camp in northeast Syria. Al-Hol facility is shutting down. The Syrian army took control of the site from Kurdish-led forces last month. Conflicts, climate change and democracy are among the issues dominating discussions at this year's African Union Summit in Addis Ababa. Many critics have called for the AU to be held more accountable. Africa has the world's youngest population. More than 400 million people are between the ages of 15 and 35. But it's also home to several of the oldest and longest-serving leaders. That's a paradox that sparked protests in some countries. Leaders are also discussing humanitarian crises in Africa and beyond, including the genocide in Gaza.
From Sudan to the Sahel, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, in Somalia and elsewhere, our people continue to pay the heavy price of instability. In the Middle East, Palestine, and the suffering of its people also challenge our consciences. The extermination of this people must stop.
Now, the UN Secretary General is calling for Africa to have a greater say in the world body. Antonio Guterres told the summit the continent will be a priority for all UN activities.
The absence of permanent African seats in the Security Council is indefensible. This is 2026, not 1946. Whatever decisions about Africa and the world are on the table, Africa must be at the table. I can guarantee that until the last moment of my mandate, Africa will be the priority number one of the UN in all its activities.
The African Union faces widespread discontent from the continent's young people. Many have taken to social media to say that the AU is a bloc of old leaders who don't prioritise their interests. Harun Mutasa has more from the summit in Addis Ababa.
African leaders say everything is urgent at the summit and that they are serious about dealing with the challenges facing the continent, things such as climate change, aid cuts and insecurity. And when you walk into this building, the African Union headquarters, you can't miss that emblem. The middle there, that's the map of Africa. The round circle represents the sun. The tentacles reaching out represents the sun's rays. And leaders say that this is to show that Africa is rising and that there's hope for the future. It's not just African leaders who are attending this summit. For example, other leaders are here. For example, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and I spoke to him on Friday, and we spoke at length about Africa and the continent. And he says that it's about time that voices from the African continent were heard more on the global stage.
When the IMF, the World Bank, and the Security Council were created, most African countries were not independent. They were under colonial domination. And so their voice was not there. And so they today are not represented at the level that corresponds to justice and at the level that is essential, because it's impossible to have good governance at the global level if a continent is not able to fully express its points of views and to influence the solution of problems, especially the problems that relate to the continent itself.
You're looking at photographs of African leaders past and present. Leaders today are trying to assert themselves on the global stage in a rapidly shifting world order, but they're dealing with an agitated young population. Young people are saying they feel their leaders are out of touch with reality on the ground.
Something is amiss. For instance, globally, there are big conversations around vaccines and fluoride. Every parliament with excellent technology and stuff are talking about it. We see it every day on social media, but it's not a conversation here in Africa yet. Why? Because, they're losing touch with reality.
Leaders are also talking about conflict resolution, how to end wars in Africa. On Sudan, they say they're concerned about the violence and they want all warring sides to lay down their guns. Harun Mutasa, Al Jazeera, Addis Ababa.
In Gaza City, where many schools and cultural spaces have been badly damaged by months of war, one small theatre is still standing. It was recently filled with music, poetry and children's laughter. Young Palestinians led the programme to showcase their skills and hopes for the future. Annie Mahmoud attended the event and sent us this report.
For a few hours in this cultural center in Gaza City, the sounds of war were replaced by song and laughter. One by one, children stepped onto the stage, some barely tall enough to reach the microphone, but determined to be heard. Two young hosts guided the audience through the program. No adults, only children running their own show. In a city shaped by destruction, today the story is being told by its youngest survivors. Not about what was lost, but about what they still believe can exist. Between performances, young people recited poems, some funny, others deeply personal. In the hallways, art lines the walls. Drawings of a future Gaza, brightly colored houses, gardens, beaches, and skies without drones.
They were very clear on their hopes for reconstruction, rehabilitation, to rebuild their neighborhoods and communities, to be families living in homes rather than tents again, and to be able to just have a normal life and go to school again every day.
Many had never been on a stage before, but the enthusiastic audience put their fears to rest.
Today was beautiful. I was so happy to take part in this initiative. I wish for a happy life for myself and for the children of Gaza, and everlasting peace for Palestine.
For the teenage presenters leading the event, the responsibility was greater. They are role models, showing younger children they can still speak up in a place where rights are silenced.
It was a very special experience with our guests and the children. Our dreams and message were clear and strong. The Gaza we want is a title that says enough and needs no explanation.
When the event came to an end, the youngsters pointed out the homes they hope to live in again someday. In a city scarred by destruction, this theater has become a rehearsal space, not just for performances, but for the future these children imagine. Hani Mahmoud, Al Jazeera, from Gaza City, Palestine.
Now, thousands of fishermen, artists and tourists have gathered in northwestern Nigeria for the popular Argungu Fishing Festival. It's making a comeback after years of disruption caused by threats of attacks by armed groups and funding shortages. The 5-day event was traditionally used as an occasion to unite rival tribes, but it's evolved to include arts and crafts, wrestling contests, and street food stalls. Ahmed Idris reports from the event in Argungu.
The Argungu Fishing Festival is a centuries-old event meant to usher in the fishing season. This event is held every year by this community until 1934, when it dramatically changed to invite fishermen from different communities. And then eventually, after Nigeria gained independence, it welcomed fishermen from other parts of Nigeria and also from neighboring countries neighboring Nigeria and even beyond. Now, today's event is being celebrated after 6 years. The concerns over the past 6 years was insecurity. Officials are forced to suspend it. But today, Argungu Fishing Festival is back and is alive. Fishermen, thousands of them, were in this river. As they fish, we saw crocodiles floating in the river, mostly juvenile crocodiles. The bigger ones, we understand, numbering about several dozens, are either downriver or have gone deep inside on the riverbed, waiting for fishermen like this to disappear. Now, over the years, we've seen how this festival has metamorphosed from a single event, that is a cultural event of fishing for sustainability. Fishing in this river doesn't begin until this festival is held. Over the years, we've seen how climate change has impacted this tradition, and now insecurity has forced government to suspend this. In 2010, for example, this festival did not hold for more than 10 years. When it held in 2010, The last time it held was in 2020, and now we're doing it after 6 years. People are absolutely happy, thrilled that this event is back. But the big question now is how far will this festival will go? Because if you look at the river, it has shrunk dramatically, significantly over the years. And there are also concerns that the fish in the river are getting depleted by the day. So these are major concerns of fishermen here in Argungu. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Argungu, Nigeria.
Colombia's flower industry is in full bloom for Valentine's Day, shipping thousands of tons of roses and carnations to the United States. But growers say tariffs introduced by US President Donald Trump and rising labor costs are squeezing profits, putting thousands of jobs at risk. Al Jazeera's Alessandro Rampietti reports from Bogota.
Sorted, cut, and millions of roses packed and ready to be shipped just in time for Valentine's Day. Colombia's flower fields are working at full speed. The country is the world's second largest flower exporter after the Netherlands, and Valentine's Day, its biggest moment, making up about a fifth of annual sales. 65,000 tons of flowers are shipped to its main market, the United States, but growers say strong sales are masking growing pressure from tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump, currency swings, and rising costs.
We've been seriously affected. The 10% tariff alone cost the industry more than $200 million. Add to that an exchange rate we haven't seen in years and rising minimum wages. In flowers, labor is about 60% of costs, and most of our workers earn the minimum wage.
Flower farms provide around 240,000 formal jobs here, many of them held by women in rural areas. Here in one of Bogota's flower markets, it's easy to see why this industry matters so much to Colombia. The growers say that it's becoming increasingly hard to make the math work. Close competitors are bridging the gap thanks to more favorable economic conditions, and some say that unless costs ease, closures and layoffs could follow in coming months.
Ecuador has no dollarized economy, so they have no exchange rate issues. Kenya and Ethiopia pay workers just $3 and $1 a day. The Netherlands barely sells into the United States, but it does in other markets. So obviously, all of this reduces our competitive edge.
Despite the pressure, workers here say the Valentine's season still brings them pride and purpose.
It's an immense joy, knowing that we're bringing happiness to someone, to a woman, to a mother, to someone admired and loved. And that also benefits us as well, despite our current challenges.
For now, the sector remains resilient, but industry leaders say tariffs need to return to zero, fearing that without relief, the bloom could fade quickly. Alessandro Rampietti, Al Jazeera, Bogota.
That's it from me, Imran Khan. You can find more information on our website, aljazeera.com. The news continues here after the listening post. And don't forget your social media. Just look for us on Al Jazeera.
If there was ever a story that should have political ramifications, it is the Epstein files. And yet, in the United States, there is an outright absence of accountability.
He is the most transparent president.
None for the president, nor for the other names in the documents. In Iran, dissidents and journalists are being rounded up as Tehran tightens its grip. Plus, they love a man in a uniform. President! The Super Bowl and American football have become essential players in the messaging of the U.S. war machine. More than 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos, the largest document release of its kind, and a very disorderly one. The long-awaited tranche of the latest Epstein files from the U.S. Department of Justice missed its own deadline, then exposed victims' identities, while redacting the names of some of the high-profile suspects involved. But this clumsy attempt at a cover-up failed to fully conceal the intricate web of global elites spanning politics, royalty, Hollywood, and tech. The common denominator, power and influence, used by a convicted child sex offender as leverage to get what he wanted and where. While some European officials have resigned over their appearance in the files, the fallout in the U.S. ranges from the limited to the non-existent, despite Donald Trump's name coming up in those files hundreds of thousands of times. Millions of pages are still being scrutinized by journalists in newsrooms and non-journalists crowdsourcing amongst each other. And Americans are waiting to see who, if anyone, will be held accountable. Given the chaotic way the Epstein files have been released, the incompetence of those who tried to redact some names but failed, and the resulting outing of some powerful men the U.S. Department of Justice was apparently trying to protect.
Salvatore Navora, Zorab Mikoladze.
Is this the worst political cover-up the world has ever seen? Worst as in inept, as in amateur hour in the halls of American justice.
Probably not the worst. I was a reporter for a very long time. Governments lie like they breathe. So I would call it a botched cover-up because people aren't buying it.
This is the worst attempt at a cover-up. Some people look at this and they think this is just incompetence. And I actually believe it is an entire strategy.
Is it really a cover-up if we know what's happening, yet no one is actually facing accountability?
And really, the media is complicit in this too, because the media is not asking key questions about what we have learned from the files, the unredacted part.
This latest release of files, 3.5 million of them, and the way they were made public by the Department of Justice was seemingly meant to muddy the waters. As Donald Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, oversees the DOJ, she appeared before a congressional committee this past week and was confronted with this.
You're running a massive Epstein cover-up right out of the Department of Justice. You redacted the names of abusers, enablers, accomplices, and co-conspirators. You shockingly failed to redact many of the victims' names, which is what you were ordered to do by Congress. This performance screams cover-up.
Another tactic of the Trump administration has been to delay. The DOJ was legally obligated to release all of the files more than 6 weeks ago. There are still another 3 million that have yet to come out, which means that in a legal case that may represent an existential threat to Donald Trump, the U.S. Department of Justice has actually broken the law.
The DOJ is essentially Trump's personal law firm, which is not what the DOJ is supposed to do. The DOJ is supposed to represent the interest of the American people. And we've only scratched the surface of this tranche of documents. The New York Times, in one of their podcasts, said,
look, if we had 50 reporters reading 500 documents a day, then it would take us 4 months to get through all the documents.
Wow. And that's not even doing actual analysis, but really just assessing what is available to the public.
It is a calculated move to try and pin this entire syndicate on one man that is no longer living, Jeffrey Epstein, and his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is in prison. It's this idea that because these two monsters are now, one is locked away and one has died, that the entire apparatus has been brought down. It hasn't. This is a syndicate that was global, run by the most powerful people around the world. It did not just disappear. The reality is, we know that somebody picked up the mantle because you just don't walk away from a multi-billion-dollar industry, right?
What stands out in the latest files, the emails pinging back and forth between Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged accomplices, are the coded, sordid references to sex, girls, and even suggestions of torture. Also emerging is more evidence on the details and the scale of Epstein's network. It was a cross-party, cross-border, intercontinental power circle involving politicians, billionaires, tech tycoons, royals, celebrities, academics, and journalists. And that network, even after Epstein became a convicted sex offender in 2008, just kept on growing. The files expose a world where prestige is everything, where information is currency that can be leveraged into profits, traded for influence. A network that for a time included Donald Trump, who Epstein once called his best friend, and whose name reportedly comes up in the files hundreds of thousands of times.
The biggest takeaway is that we were lied to by the Trump administration. Kash Patel, Donald Trump's hand-picked leader of the FBI, a former conspiracy theorist himself, who spent many years in opposition talking about the Epstein files.
Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are.
As soon as he becomes head of the FBI, he says, no, there's nothing there, we've looked. And there was no trafficking, it was just Epstein. There's no evidence that he sent underage girls to anyone else. Well, that's not true.
What we've not seen are the videos. When the FBI raided Epstein's mansion in New York, he had a safe the size of a closet. And we know that there were many, many recordings. That's not come to light. The mantra of everybody outed in the Epstein files is that they were ignorant of what Epstein was doing. Yet we know from the email exchanges that they were very well aware. I mean, the nickname for his jet was the Lolita Express. You don't even have to have read Nabokov to figure out what that's about.
Donald Trump's prominence in the files has got everyone's attention, but Americans are still waiting for a politician there, any politician, to take the fall. Contrast that to Europe, where major players in the UK and France have resigned over their links to Epstein. Heads have also rolled in Norway and Slovakia. Up until now, Watergate, back in the 1970s, was the most infamous political scandal in U.S. history, after Republican operatives broke into a Democratic Party office to bug phones and photograph documents. President Richard Nixon tried to cover up that crime. He was found out, then forced to resign. I accept it. In the half-century since, America has changed, and accountability appears to have become a thing of the past.
50 years ago, Republicans were able to stand up to a Republican president. They are no longer able to do that. Republicans were able to go to the White House and say, President Nixon, you've clearly committed crimes. You've clearly done things which are unacceptable to the American public. You got to go. And he did go. He was on the verge of being impeached and convicted. Donald Trump is not on the verge of being impeached. His party backs every move that he does. No matter what scandal it is, they will fall straight in line behind him.
I do not believe that if Richard Nixon was in trouble in this day and age, that he would have had to been forced to resign. He would have had an entire media apparatus that was dedicated to gaslighting millions of people each and every day to believe that he did absolutely nothing wrong.
This latest release serving as vindication, though, for the President of the United States. The Democrats shouldn't be out there trying to push, saying that somehow this has something to do with President Trump. That's a complete hoax.
The rot inside of this country is so incredibly deep that pedophilia is no longer a bipartisan issue. And my concern is that whoever comes next is not going to be able to mend the deep fracture that has occurred.
The UK has a handful of men, very powerful men, implicated in the scandal, and it's threatening the monarchy, the elected government. It is roiling financial and political institutions in France, in Slovakia, all over the world. People are realizing this is so bad. The United States has crossed a point where it will be incredibly difficult to undo the damage that this administration has done to our systems of justice. And I hope every government abroad pursues that, because we're most definitely not getting it here.
Ultimately, this is a story that pits two networks against each other. The wealthy, powerful people in Jeffrey Epstein's circle, that network was selective. It was closed to people less privileged than them. But another network was not. The informal patchwork coalition that has come together on the web. Lawyers, podcasters, activists, citizens of all kinds have been combing through the files, gathering evidence that news outlets are now capitalizing on. It is a far less elite, much more inclusive crowd, with people from both the right and the left, that even has some conspiracy theorists in its ranks, a network that has proven to be influential in its own way.
Social media has been a force for good, clearly, when it comes to the release of the Epstein files. The great irony is that the biggest pressure for all this came from QAnon, this far-right conspiratorial network that said there was a cabal of powerful media and political people who were covering up for a pedophile network. Sadly, QAnon were kind of right about that bit. They just pointed in the wrong direction. They claimed it was the liberal left, and actually turns out it was the MAGA right.
I worked for the New York Times, so I was kind of an honorary member of the elite. I certainly had close physical proximity to them and understood them. But most people don't get that close. Most people aren't allowed into that inner sanctum, and they're grasping in the dark. They don't actually understand the machinations of these circles, but their instincts have been right.
It has been a month now since the Iranian authorities imposed a total internet blackout during a violent crackdown on anti-government protesters. Connectivity is still an issue, and reports are emerging of a renewed wave of repression targeting journalists and political figures. Tarek Nafa has been following the story.
Sweeping communications restrictions in Iran have made it extraordinarily difficult for journalists there to do their jobs. The reporting that is getting out indicates authorities are continuing to tighten the screws on the media. The New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists says security forces have been raiding journalists' homes, seizing their devices and IDs, and blocking bank accounts and SIM cards. CPJ says these punitive measures are a clear attempt to blind the world to the reality on the ground. With journalists in Tehran reporting the possibility of a new wave of protests, prominent reformist politicians were also arrested by Iranian security and judicial authorities this week. According to state-affiliated news outlets, they face charges that include attacking national unity and engaging with hostile media narratives. One of the few ways for Iranians to bypass restrictions and get online has been Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite internet network. But during the recent wave of protests, authorities appear to be using new methods to jam access to Starlink. Some experts say Chinese hardware may be helping them to do so. The extent to which Chinese technology underpins Iran's approach to digital infrastructure was outlined in a report this week by human rights organization Article 19. The report says that China is supercharging surveillance and censorship capabilities in Iran by providing the government with key internet filtering technologies from Chinese companies like Huawei and Hikvision. By pursuing such a degree of control over the digital space and attempting to create its own curated version of the internet, Article 19 says the Iranians are making sure dissent is not just silenced, it is prevented from ever surfacing.
Thanks, Tarek. Last week, the most watched sporting event in the United States was broadcast across the country. The Super Bowl, the final act of the National Football League season, attracts more than 100 million viewers. It is a spectacle made for TV, meticulously planned, from the moment the show begins with a celebration of the U.S. military. From choreographed flyovers to flags stretching the length of the field, no other sports league has marketed patriotism as aggressively or successfully as the NFL. Militarism is embedded into sports and entertainment in the U.S. And as the Trump administration tries to impose ISIS agenda across the country, the Immigration Enforcement Agency is also trying to get in on the act. The Listening Post's Ryan Cole's now on the Super Bowl and the NFL's habit of giving the U.S. military some serious screen time.